they generate HTML fragments, which in turn are assembled together to form a portal page. On to the next slide now. Specifications and containers. Now, we've all heard of this term called containers. May not be standalone individually. We've heard of terms like a servlet container. We've heard terms like an EJB container. So what are containers? Essentially, a container usually takes care of a web component. It manages the entire life cycle of the web of the component it contains. So in that sense, a servlet container manages servlets. It manages the entire life cycle of the servlets. EJB container does the same for EJB. So whatever container we're talking about, it manages the life cycle and the interaction of the external world with that component. So that is what a container is. And where specification fits is that the language or the protocol between the container and the component is actually the specification. So that is how the containers interact with their components. So essentially, if I were to define a servlet container, then I would say a servlet container is a program that implements the servlet specifications. Similarly, an EJB container is the one that implements the EJB specifications. So this is a relationship between specifications and containers is. On to the next slide now. So what is a portlet specification? Well, first of all, there is a container called a portlet container. Just as we said, there is a servlet container, there is an EJB container, there is an entity called a servlet, a portlet container. And as I said a while ago, a portlet container is actually a software program that implements the portlet specifications. And portlet specifications, just like servlet specifications or EJB specifications or any other specifications, they actually let a portlet container communicate with portlets. So once again, portlet container implements the portlet specifications, and the specifications are the common language with which the portlet and its container they talk together. Now, the portlet specifications have been around for a while, just as any other specifications actually. So it started off with the IBM API, which was first portlet specifications. So IBM started off with this concept of portlets. At that time, as the name says, it was a proprietary API, which essentially means there was no other portlet container available in the market. Because as I said, the API was proprietary, it wasn't open. So the IBM servers, again in a very layman term, were the only ones which were the portlet containers available in the market. But that changed after a while once JSR 168, which is also known as the portlet specification 1.0, was released. Now the biggest advantage of releasing the portlet specs as a JSR was that it was open to the rest of the world. Now what does that mean? What that essentially implies is the specifications were open to the vendors to create their portlet containers. That had a very big advantage. What that meant was, if you created a portlet which was implemented according to a specification, then theoretically speaking, you could run that portlet on any portlet container. So it's very similar to the concept of servlets. So if you create a servlet, then you can run it essentially on any servlet container of your choice from any vendor. The reason is because the servlet specifications are open. There are plenty of servers out there that implement the servlet specifications. Similarly, starting with JSR 168, which as I said was called Portlet 1.0, multiple vendors could manufacture their portlet container. So a portlet that was written once could be run on any portlet container. And this is the advantage of the power of having a common specification. If you have a container that implements a particular specification, that it does not matter for which container you're writing the component. Once you've written that component, as long as you can find a container, you can run it. So that made the portlets portable. So after GSR 168, GSR 286 came about. That was around 2007, 2008 when GSR 286 was developed, which essentially also is the latest portlet specifications that are out there. Again, there are many vendors which have the portlet containers implemented according to GSR 286 or version 2.0. Again, most of the portlets you would see which are being created now are being done according to the GSR 286 specs. Again, pretty similar to servlet specs. Most of the servlets that you would create, you would want them to be according to the latest specs. Similarly, Portlet 2.0 or JSR 286 is the latest specification of portlet. So again, just to very quickly summarize, portlet specifications, that is what helps a portlet as a component communicate with the portlet container. Portlet container in turn implements the portlet specification. Now, the fact that portlet specifications started off as IBM API were proprietary meant that your portlets were written specifically for IBM portlet containers. Now, with GSR 168 and GSR 286 developed, multiple vendors entered the fray. They created their portlet containers, and your portlet once written could be ported across portlet containers. Okay, on to the next slide now. Now, if you've been noticing, I haven't used the word portal a lot. In fact, I'm mostly using the word portlet container. So what is the difference between a portlet container and a portal? For all practical purposes, they are essentially the same. However, there is a very big difference. A portlet container has to, doesn't have any choice, has to implement the portlet specifications. It does not have any flexibility. Whereas a portal, in addition to being a portlet container, it also does significant additional tasks. Mind you, without which the portlet container does not have a real meaning actually. So mathematically speaking, I would say a portal is equal to a portlet container plus X. So what is that X? Now, if we go back to our initial discussion about portals, a portal is nothing but a collection of portlets, collection of windows, referred to ID. And as I said, a single portlet is actually a single web component, a single Java component. So a single Java component, a portlet, it accepts a request and it throws back an HTML fragment, which is corresponding to that particular portlet. So take an example of a portal on which I have, let's say, 6 windows. There's one for news, there's one for weather, there's one for travel, and so on and so on. There are 2 more. So there are 5 windows or 5 portlets. Now, these constitute a portal. So the 5 windows or 5 portlets individually will be throwing back their fragments. And they'll process the information depending upon what the outcome is, just as a servlet would, they would send back a response, which is essentially an HTML fragment. So between you as a user seeing the portal page as a collection of these portlets and this portlet throwing fragments back, the entity that sits between you and the portlet container is actually the portal. So what portlet container does, it puts back the fragments to the portal intercepts those fragments, it aggregates the fragments, it aggregates the portlets and assembles the portal page. And that is what the primary task of a portal is, which is aggregation. Mind you, in spite of aggregation being one of the most critical tasks for a portal, it does not form a part of portlet specifications, which means every portal is allowed to implement aggregation the way it feels like. It is not standardized across portlets, which actually does not make any difference. But the key to remember here is a portal contains a portlet container, which is very strictly what the portlet specifications are. It implements that. In addition to that, it provides other services. For example, the page aggregation being the foremost, where it aggregates the portlets, individual portlets, assembles the portal page, and sends it back to the user. Apart from that, there are additional tasks that a portal does. We're going to look at it in a while, but just for the sake of reference, aggregation, how the layout of the individual portlets is done, that is managed by portals. How individual rules are spelled out, how what content goes, who can see what content. These are all rules called personalization rules. This is all taken care by portals. Of course, administration and configuration part. Managing your portlets, assigning permissions, etc., etc. So these are all things which do not fall under portlet container, but these are tasks done by the portal over on top of a portlet container. But as I said, for all practical purposes, a portal and a portlet container, they are usually treated as one. A very good example I can give is the IBM WebSphere application server is a portlet container, which means I can deploy or publish my portlets on IBM WebSphere application server, which means my IBM WebSphere application server is capable of starting my portlets and hosting my portlets so that they can process requests and give back a response. But what an IBM WebSphere application server cannot do for me is create a portal page. It cannot combine the output of various portlets and give me an aggregated output. And that is where the IBM WebSphere portal steps in. IBM WebSphere portal is actually a portal, and as I said, a portal sitting on top of portlet container. It gets all the fragments from the portlet container or the WebSphere application server, and it gives it back to the user. So, if you have a portal, which is the IBM WebSphere portal, you would always have an IBM WebSphere application server running inside it. Because as I said, a portal will always have a portlet container inside it. All right, next slide. Now this is a very good block diagram to explain some of the concepts that I was talking about. So the client is actually a web browser. So if you are a client or a web browser which is sending requests to, let's say, URL, maybe the iGoogle URL or probably your company intranet site, it reaches the portal. Then the portal dispatches that request to the portlet container. Now, why portlet container? If you notice, portlet container is the guy that is talking to the portlet applications running inside it. And if you also notice, blue rectangle is the portlet API or the portlet specifications. And recall what I mentioned in the previous slide, portlet specifications is what lets or allows the portlet container to speak to the individual portlets. So the flow of information is the client or the browser sends the URL, you hit the URL in the browser, it reaches the portal, The portal then sends the information or the URL to the portlet container. Portlet container talks to the individual portlets. Individual portlets, they do the processing based on whatever the input is. They return the output, which is, mind you, HTML fragments. They are not web pages, they are HTML fragments. The portlet container gives back the fragments to the portal. The portal constructs the entire page. It fits in those fragments, assembles the entire portal page, and gives it back to the user. So this is how the entire thing pans out. Okay, next slide. Why portals? Actually, the earlier question that I had put up was why portlets. A big part of that answer is it actually lies in the answer to this question: why portals? The reason of why portlets is because portlets are the building blocks of a portal, and a portal has a bigger business case. So essentially, you would want to use portlets because portlets let you get services or let you avail services of a portal. So why do you need a portal? Next slide. Now, these are the various reasons for which you would want to get a portal. In a typical web application or a website that you would have, it is bound to have things like branding. By branding, I mean, your corporate logo, the headers, the footers, the coloring scheme, etc. So that is what theming and branding is. Navigation, how the flow of the website is, how to manage that. Search. Most or almost every website that you go across offers you this ability to search the content. Of course, content, web content is probably the most critical part of the website these days. Targeted content. So what I mean by targeted content is, you must have been to the telecom sites like Airtel, Idea. So depending upon your geographies, you are shown campaigns which not entirely all the user base gets to see. So that is what is meant by targeted content. So what targeted content means is a content which is conditional based on certain rules. And also, as I said, a portal is essentially a composition of a lot of things. So, you would want so if it's an intranet, company intranet, you would want the news to be there, you would want a link or probably some small hotspot of HR information to be there, and plenty of other things, so there are small hotspots which are there. So this needs to be all put together and aggregated. So, typically on websites would need to tackle this, the concepts of theming, branding, navigation, searching, the web content, the targeted content, and composition of all of this. So what typically we end up doing is implement this. Of course, the fact that there are websites which do this means that people are implementing these concepts. However, the problem with this is most of us do it in an ad hoc manner. There is no standardized way in which we go about doing it. And this is where a portal steps in. A portal is a specialized software which is designed to do exactly all of this. A portal will do theming and branding in your behalf. A portal will handle single sign-on on your behalf, so that you just log on to your portal and whatever backend applications, be it SAP, be it SharePoint, it does log in on your behalf and presents all the information to you on a single interface. You don't even get to know where all the information is coming from at the backend. Search, content, targeted content, composition, all of this a portal does for you out of the box and in a standardized way. So the difference is, if you use a portal, you are getting a product that does this day in and day out and in a standardized way. Essentially, a portal is a piece of software that has already solved these problems and is in a much robust shape, in a much better shape. It's been there for a while. It's a very stable concept. The portal is a very stable concept. So if you were to implement all of this from scratch, number one, it is going to be difficult, not impossible. I can assure you it's not impossible, but it's going to be very difficult. And number two, it's going to be a huge task for you to maintain all of this. So this is where a portal triumphs. If you use a web application server, fine, all of this is doable. But a portal is actually a specialized server designed to do all of this for you. It is meant to create and maintain such sites. And that is why we must take a look at portal or think about having a portal host our sites.